Hello, my name is Ali. I'm going to share with you a painting of a red kite. Now, red kites to me are the end of summer, the beginning of autumn, and whilst they were once endangered in my part of the world, they're now flourishing again. And there's nothing I like more than taking my dogs for a walk with the red kite hovering overhead while my dogs flush out all the wildlife. It's such a beautiful thing to see. So I'm going to try to get the personality of that red kite down on my watercolour paper. I've already done the drawing, which I've used the trace down method to get it on here, and I've got my reference material close by. So as you can see, this is a red kite in close up because I really wanted to get that eye and the plumage in with the feathers. But let's give it a background first, shall we? And to do that, I'm going to use a lovely soft blue, getting my number 10 brush and loading it up with water to make a puddle of this beautiful Potter's blue watercolour, which I'm going to make there. I'm probably going to need quite a lot of it, so let's make a nice big puddle because I need it for another part of my painting later too. Pop my brush down to one side, and then two things I'm going to get ready. I'm going to get ready a bit of kitchen roll scrunched up, and I'm going to get my spray bottle. Now you could put the water down in the background to create a nice soft finish, but I'm going to do this faster version of that, which is to give my paper a really good spritz. And then I can pick up the blue paint, drop it in around my bird and pull it into the background so that I've got a lovely soft edge. Now this is just a background to the bird. This isn't nearly as important as the bird itself, but we do need to give the bird a nice background, and I think this blue is the perfect colour. Working my way around the beak, painting negatively at the moment, although I am going to use this blue for something else in a little bit. Coming round down to the bottom, let's work in under the beak there too. Putting in that blue and letting it blend out into the water. We can always add more water if we want to pull that colour down. And down here, I'm going to let it just flow off the page, just run off into nothing, so that I've got a nice portrait shot. With my kitchen roll, I'm going to unfold it and fold it back up again to knock the texture out of it, and then I can use it across the background to create a little bit of a pattern, but also to keep all of those patches in check. And there, because of the soft nature of the blue and the use of the kitchen roll, we've got a lovely texture going on. I'm going to let that go off a little bit while I talk to you about wax. Now this is a wax resistic. It's clear, it looks white, but it does come out clear. And I'm going to use it for a soft resist. And by that, I mean that I put it on and the wax stays on. And what it will do is repel any of the colour that I put down. I'm going to try to use it to emulate some of this plumage by using it in little short bursts around. I've got quite a nice edge on it, and it is a bit tricky to see, which does mean that sometimes you can get it in the wrong place, but give it a practice first, get used to what it looks like when you put it down. And actually, because of some of the other products I'm going to be using later in this project, it doesn't really matter anyway. I'm using it up and around because I want as much texture as I possibly can in this portrait to show those incredible feathers. Red kites are really easy to spot, not simply because of the colour of their plumage, but the shape that their tail makes in the sky. And that's how I always tell the difference between a buzzard and a red kite. Let's have a look, give it a little bit more. I'm pressing quite hard, but trying not to make a regular mark. I'm trying to scribble with it a little bit. And you'll see when I get some of my colour on how that's going to help create all of the texture in the background of the bird. One thing I want to do is I want to use Brusho, this fabulous powdered pigment, down onto the bird to give the illusion of feathers. But I want to do it as carefully as I possibly can. So I just need to do a little bit of preparation first. I'm going to tear up some kitchen roll into some irregular shapes to pop around the outside of my bird. Because as much as I love Brusho and as much as I love the immediacy of it, I want to keep that texture within the confines of the bird. Now I've got something else I've got to do to the bird first with my brush, but I'm putting this down so that when I sprinkle, hopefully it will just stay on the bird itself. Now I'm not going to put any kitchen roll over the end of the bird because I don't want it to stop abruptly. I'm going to only place it in the areas around. And actually, looking at my photograph, one thing I am going to do is I'm going to place a bit of it over the beak so that the texture is literally only just on the feathers themselves rather than on any of the rest of it. A bit more down there, and then that's good to go. You could use dressmaker's pins to pin it down if you thought that it was going to go anywhere, but I'm happy with it as it is. I've got some dark brown Brusho, and I don't know if you noticed from my reference photograph, but there's an awful lot of blue on the bird itself, which tells me where the white areas are. I know that sounds a bit daft, but there's quite a lot of blue, and I'm going to use that potter's blue that I used earlier, put down onto my bird, and then the Brusho sprinkled into it. But I need to make sure that I've got everything ready first. So I have a cocktail, no I don't, I have a coffee stirrer. So I've got that ready for using for my sprinkling. And here I've got my big brush again and the potter's blue, which I'm going to add a little bit more water to, so it's not quite as strong as the background. So I made a really nice big puddle in there and popping a little bit of it down. Now you can see straight away where the wax is because it's repelling that colour and it's doing its job brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly. And using it in there, so I've already got plenty of that texture down. I'm really pleased with that. Those feather shapes that are so dominant in my photo reference are now coming through. And then into that, I've got the dark brown and my coffee stirrer. And I'm going to pop the coffee stirrer into the pot of powder and just tap it off until literally I've only got a vague dusting on the coffee stirrer, and then from right up on high I can tap it, and you can see that you don't need very much of it in order to create this incredible pattern, and the watercolour is grabbing hold of it and letting it run. If you wanted it to run further, one thing you can do, because my bird has dried out a little bit down here, so let's pop some down in there on the dry. And then one really quick technique is to take your spray bottle and from a nice distance spray that Brusho so that it moves. I'm going to help mine along by going back in with my number 10 brush and a little bit of that potter's blue again and help that texture to develop. Because one of the things that you will notice from the reference material is the fact that it's all about the pale colours and the dark colours in between on this bird. That's what gives it its amazing texture. Let's add a little bit more water down here. There's other things I've got to do to it yet, obviously, but I can get that texture working for me really nicely. And on the photograph I can see that it does actually get darker towards the neck and the wing of the bird. So let's encourage the Brusho down the page and we'll fuzz it out into nothing. I'll work on the wing later. Let's just fuzz that out, and then hopefully when we take away our pieces of kitchen roll, there is our texture all done for us with combinations of the wax and the watercolour and the Brusho, and I'm really pleased with that. That's going really well. Before I let this dry, there's a couple of other things I want to do to it. I'm going to make that dark brown into an ink. So I pop a small amount of powder down on my palette and add some water to it. Now to keep within the themes that I've been using and the materials that I've been using on this project, I'm going to use the blue watercolour again in here, in the shoulder area of the wing. Popping that colour in, fading it out, and then using the Brusho as an ink over the top, just to distinguish that part of the bird from the rest of it. Again, I can use my kitchen roll, and hopefully that is a natural end to the left-hand edge of our portrait then. And of course, one of the biggest features of this bird is the beak. So I'll switch to a slightly smaller brush. Let's switch to the number 8 brush. And using the quinacridone gold, making that up into quite a strong colour, I'm going to make sure that I've got colour over everything. So that's colour in the top here and working backwards towards that crease in their jaw. That's still a little bit wet there, but that's okay. I can work on that bit later. Brusho's providing me a lovely shadow there, which I hadn't anticipated, and that's great, doing it for me. Using that colour, bringing it all the way around to the tip, and the point of this brush is getting right to the end of it, which is fabulous. Now in the eye area, we need to put a little bit of yellow around. So it's got this yellow socket coming all the way around the eye. Again, I'm picking up a little bit of the Brusho, but that's fine. I'm just going with it and coming into there. And then there's lots of colours that you could use for the eye. I'm going to use that Potter's Blue colour again because I think that will make a nice vehicle for the other things that I'm going to put on top later. So let's pop that blue in around and about. And the bird looks a bit vacant at the moment, but that's simply because we haven't got the pupil in. I'll let that dry, and I'm going to take some of the translucent grey just to start building up the shadows. And when I've done that, I will have put colour on everything. And putting colour on everything, of course, means that you then know what else your painting needs. And whilst this is just a sketch, it's important to get your lights and your darks in so that you know what else needs working on. Popping the colour in underneath. Ooh. Taking that out, that works. Where else do we need a shadow? We need a shadow in up here. Whilst it's still all wet, it's all blending together beautifully. I wonder how dry that eye is. Let's give it a go and see if we can pop it in, because that would help enormously for me to see what else needs doing. It's not anywhere near dark enough yet, but it's getting there. And whilst that's all still a bit damp, we can start to make some marks with this grey to improve on the texture that we got earlier. Now there's not much else I can do to that until all of that's dry, because I need to start picking out the detail and building it up so that it's a really, really strong portrait. So I'm going to leave that to dry, and when we come back we'll work on the detail. My painting is completely dry now, so all it needs is a little bit of detail to bring it together. The first thing I'm going to use is a waterproof sketching pen, and I'm using this primarily because I want to get the detail in that eye. Obviously the eye of this bird is fantastically important to get it looking really kind of pinpoint accurate. So I'm able to use the pen to get the detail in. I can draw around my highlight, and I can use it for colouring that pupil in too, so starting to look much more beady already. I can also use it around the socket of the eye to outline it and really give it some clarity. I'm not going to go too mad with that. I'm also going to use it for the shadow, which I can pop in with another tool in just a second, and I can put a little bit of texture in around. Let's get that in. A little bit more pen on the beak and in the fold of the beak and over the end, but again I'm not going to try not to do too much there because I don't want to start outlining everything, and pop that in there. Whilst that's going on, I'm going to switch to a small brush. This is the number 2 brush, and grab myself a little bit of kitchen roll and some of that translucent grey, because I want to get that shadow in. That shadow around the eyeball is really, really important, and the thing that makes the eye stand out. So let's pop that in. Use some water for the shading. In fact, it could be a little bit darker than that. Let's be a little bit braver. Get that in with the really fine brush. That's better. And then that just differentiates enough to give the bird a real stare, which is exactly what we want. I can also use some of that grey in the middle over the top of the pen to heighten the intensity of that dark. can also use my brush. There we go, that's looking much better now. And now I can put the texture in on the bird itself. And for that, I'm going to use some pastel pencils. I've got 3 colours here. I have got carbon black, chocolate and titanium white. And I'm going to use those very loosely over the surface to give me a little more texture, and then we'll pull it together right at the end. So let's start with the chocolate. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it like a normal pencil, and I'm going to use it to describe some of these edges nice and loosely. One of the things I like to do with pastel, because it combines so well with the watercolour and the Brusho, it's very good at describing plumage and the feathers. So light strokes, I'm letting the pencil skip across the paper, and the texture of the watercolour paper is helping with that too. I can use my finger to smudge it together if I need to. And in some of these areas down here where I need a little extra shading, that will help also. Switching to the white, which I can use to put back in, and I'm using this differently now. I'm using this on its side, over the top, to blend out any of the areas that I think are too dark. I can start to improve the clarity just around here, around his beak, because that's a little bit sharper and greyer in there. That's better. Now it's starting to come together. And you can see the build-up of the pastel and the Brusho and the watercolour and the pen all allows these layers to shine through. And that's what you're after. If it looks a bit too fluffy and a bit too cute, because we don't want a cute-looking red kite, then you can use your finger to smudge it together. And let's switch to the carbon black now, which I can use over the top of that watercolour. And actually you can use them over the top of damp watercolour, which sometimes fixes it down and makes it stick much better. There's the black, and I'm putting in that super highlight with the white. Switching back to the chocolate brown, which will give me lovely shadows and marks, and using the brown over the top to give it a little bit more texture, because I'm now looking at the direction of these feathers and which way they move, which is what's going to give the contours of my bird. Let's get those in. Using pastel over the top of watercolour is such a great thing to do, because it really feels like you're sculpting it. And even in these quick little tutorials, you can achieve something really, really quickly with them by using the tools to your best advantage so that they do all the hard work and you don't have to. Continuing in with that brown. Anything that I do now is really just emphasising the hard work that I did at the start. And again, that's what you want to happen. You want your materials to be working for you. I'm looking at all the little bits of detail to help me get this bird towards completion. One thing I will do is describe that wing a little bit more, coming down. Using my finger, I can switch to the white, which will help it blend together too. And a bit darker in here. You'll find that when you get a chalk pencil in your hand, it's just so tempting. You want to do more and more and more and more. And you can see that the more I add, the more it brings it together. But of course, I really don't want to push it too far. Last little bit to do is back in with my sketching pen. I need some more clarity around the edges of him, just to bring him forward of the background. So I will give him a small amount of outline, continue that shape into the fold at the back of his beak, because I've missed that a little bit, and add a few more squiggles so that it doesn't look too outlined. And I think we're almost there. Last few bits of detail. I know the bit I've missed. I've missed the grey end of his beak. So let's get the carbon black, and using the pastel pencil, sculpt that shadow that's on the end of his beak, because that's very important as well, so that your red kite looks like a red kite. And I'm going to leave him well alone. The Brushos work brilliantly for the texture for me, and it's come together really rather quickly, building up those layers to create that beady eye of my Dorset Red Kite.